COZI TV presents 10 secret stories. Our TV heroes, our TV icons, our top stars and shows, and what we might not know about them. This episode, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show.
You're not angry?
No, I am not angry.
Carl wanted to do something that was very real.
Honey, who have you got in there?
He wrote it as a starring vehicle for himself.
And Sheldon said, "You won't fail. I'll get a better actor to play you."
They were given a lot of latitude in terms of, hey, if you think something's funny or you have a suggestion to throw in, please. Carl welcomed that.
We'll hear from comics and critics, stars of the original series.
I wore a bra for this.
And my wife said to me in her infinite wisdom, she said, "Why don't you write one?"
COZI TV's 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, starts now. Number 10. It was the first really modern TV sitcom where men and women were equal.
There was a real equality of the sexes on the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Why are you shouting at me?
I'm shouting at me, you're just in the way.
At home between Laura and Rob, and at the job with Sally among the male writers in the room.
Rob,
Buddy.
Sally,
Mel?
Rob,
Sally.
Buddy!
Go ahead, Curly, it's your turn. Say Rob. Rob!
Even today, Laura and Rob would have a very equal partnership. But back then, in the 60s, that kind of partnership was revolutionary to see on TV.
Never in my 30-odd years of life have I been so embarrassed and humiliated and ashamed.
There was a certain level of mutual respect and equality in their relationship that you didn't necessarily see in shows before that.
Right now, if you had any compassion, you'd put your arms around me and tell me that you're as sorry for me as I am for myself.
It was based on my wife's relationship with me, which was 65 years it lasted.
Carl wanted to do something that was very real. And I think when you look at some of those other shows, not that they weren't real in ways, but Dennis and Menace, I mean, it's a comic book. You know, it was a cartoon. Ozzie and Harriet was the very, sanitized family, right, where, there were singers and you never saw Ozzie at work.
And you knew that this was a couple that really, truly loved and respected each other.
It's kind of interesting. Very flattering to see a man destroy himself for the love of a beautiful woman.
And I don't think that was always the case in TV couples in that era.
Laura actually kind of excelled at a lot, whereas previous sitcoms, the wife was kind of second in charge, not quite as good as the husband.
I mean, she could dance, and she went to work with Rob one day.
I don't like to butt in, darling, but don't you think it's a little soon for Alan to repeat the German scientist character? I mean, he did it on last week's show.
Hey, she's right. She got a point there.
She could do anything she wanted.
On I Love Lucy, Lucy always wanted a lot, but couldn't really do a lot.
Like Lucy and Desi. Lucy may be the best comedian ever worked. Beautiful woman. But their program was two against each other. She was always looking ways to get into his life. He was always looking ways to get her out of his life.
And on the Dick Van Dyke Show, there was much more of a feeling of equality between the two of them, and much more of a back and forth.
Sit down, I'll fix your breakfast.
Come on, forget breakfast. Let's sit down and talk this out right now.
And a discussion and a collaboration of what it was to be a couple. What it was to be a married couple at that time was redefined by them.
And I said, this is two against the world, not against each other. Rob and Laura were myself and Estelle. We just had, normal disagreements.
Friday nights what? Well, honey, why didn't you tell me? No, you didn't. No, boy, you did. Yeah. Well.
And we always came together. And most of the time, the wife was right.
Honey, I think you're right.
I know I'm right.
Sally Rogers on the Dick Van Dyke Show, she held her own. She wrote just as hard. She was just as funny as the guys.
Oh, no, you're not going to leave me to write that script alone.
What do you mean alone? I'll be there with you.
Oh, no, you're not going to leave me to write that script.
Rosemarie was an equal to Buddy. She wasn't, especially at that time, that was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, with comedy, I'm the same way. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. If you're funny, to me, you're just funny.
Supposing our star says, "Good night, folks. Sure hope you enjoyed our show. And remember, the Alan Brady thought for the day is, drive carefully, especially on the sidewalks."
Sally on the Dick Van Dyke Show really spoke to me because I write television comedy, and I'm so used to walking into a room and being the only woman And the fact that there was a woman in that room is amazing.
I got a lot of that. A lot of women came up to me and said, you were the first liver, you worked for two men on an equal basis. You were the first woman to do that. You were equal with two other guys in the office.
Hey, how about Alan comes into the saloon with his guns blazing?
What's funny about that?
They're still in the holster.
Their writer's room had a woman in it. I mean, that's a third women in that writer's room. That's better than the writer's rooms now. I mean, it is still all white, but like there was a woman. Like there were late night shows that don't have a single woman in the writer's room.
I had the privilege of being the girl or one of the girls in the room. I wrote for a little show you may have heard of called In Living Color for a couple of seasons, and being the girl is an interesting position to be in because the bar is set so low.
I was told once in a meeting that they loved me and I was so funny, but we already have a woman. I guess you can only have one.
And so I always kind of use her as a role model. I want to be like Sally when I grow up.
Hey, I got a fantastic idea. Boing! I don't know why I didn't think of it.
The cool thing about Rob Petrie and Buddy Sorrell is they treated her as an equal.
One more joke and we can call it a week.
If Hollywood could ever get that right, it would be a happier town to work in.
I can't tell you how many friends, women, people I've come across in my life that have said Rosemary was like my inspiration.
And women came up to me, funny places, bookstores, department stores, and because of you, I'm a writer. Because of you, I decided I'd be a writer. If you could do it, I could do it.
Coming up, casting the Dick Van Dyke Show was a collaborative effort.
And I said, who have you got for the third writer? And they said, we haven't picked him yet.
And the man with the rubber body.
Steve Martin just lately said that the single most talented man in our business is definitely Dick Van Dyke.
10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, continues here on COZI TV. Welcome back to COZI TV's 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Number 9, casting the show was something Carl Reiner, the producers, and even the cast members collaborated on.
So Carl Reiner came out of Your Show Shows, which was one of the greatest TV shows of all time. And that writer's room is known for having been just talent-packed. So after Your Show Shows wrapped, he was offered his pick of series, but really nothing matched his standards.
And my wife said to me in her infinite wisdom, she said, why don't you write one? I said, what piece of ground do you stand on that nobody stands on? I live in New Rochelle as a husband and father. I work in New York as an actor-writer. I write about that. So I wrote a thing called Head of the Family.
But he wrote it as a starring vehicle for himself, and really nobody wanted to watch it. You can still find it on the internet. And while the show itself wasn't a hit, he had already written 13 scripts, and his agent was just sure that he had gold on his hands and really wanted to do something with it.
He gave them to Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas, who looked at it and said, they called me in and said, these are wonderful scripts. I said, fellas, I don't want to fail with the same material twice. And Sheldon said, you won't fail? I'll get a better actor to play you. Pretty good impression.
And the smartest thing Carl ever did, he admits, was fire himself as the lead in that show.
Hi there, remember me?
Right.
And the series evolved into a very balanced portrayal of a family at home with a young boy.
Good morning, honey.
Good morning, darling.
Good morning, buddy. Good morning, Sally.
And the husband going off to work and his work colleagues and what went on at work that would then influence what goes on at home.
Don't you know our chief well enough by now? When he's sick, he works harder. When he broods, it's one of two things. One, he had a fight with Laura, or two, Laura had a fight with him.
True or false?
True.
Well, what was the beef about?
I don't know. We didn't fight long enough for me to find out.
Oh, one of those, and if you don't know, I'm certainly not going to tell you.
And it was, I think, one of the first series to really balance that home life with the workplace.
So Sheldon Leonard was actually the person who suggested Dick Van Dyke for the role. Carl Reiner went to go see him on Broadway in Bye Bye Birdie and was just blown away.
Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas used to come and see me in Vegas. Hugsy Siegel decided to make the Flamingo. That was the first high-class hotel there, and I opened it with Jimmy Durante and Xavier Cugat. I worked there off and on all the time. And they would come and visit me and see the show. And I'd go out and sit with them at the table. And I'd say to Danny, when am I going to do your show? When am I going to do your show? Your time will come. Your time will come. Okay. Finally, one day I get a call. Go down to Desilu. Oh, Jesus, I got a guest shot, finally. She says, no, this is for the Dick Van Dyke Show.
The Dick Van Dyke Show. Starring Dick Van Dyke.
I said, what's a Dick Van Dyke?
So they had Rose Marie on deck, but they still needed an actor to play Buddy, and it was actually Rose Marie who suggested Maury Amsterdam.
You gotta start off each day with a joke, and everything will be okey-doke. All your troubles will go off in SMOK. You start off each day with a joke. Joke, do a joke.
And I said, who have you got for the third writer? And they said, we haven't picked him yet. I said, how about Maury Amsterdam?
Maury Amsterdam was, I don't know if people know that he was one of the first people to have a regular TV show it was on the Dumont Network in 1949. Gave Art Carney his start. It was called the Maury Amsterdam Show.
And she mentioned Maury, and I said, I was thinking of a Mel Brooksian type, a younger guy.
All right, I got a joke. Did you hear about the fellow crossed an abalone with a crocodile?
No, what did he get?
A crocodile.
He knows every joke in the book. Everybody knows him. He'd be wonderful for the third writer.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, for our first encore, may I present to you our human joke machine.
And then I thought, Maury is the human joke machine. I saw he had a place in New York where he used to get up on stage. They throw just a word at him, and he make 10 jokes about any subject.
This man can make a joke out of any word in the English language. Maybe we have a word.
Any word, somebody with a word, any word.
Horse. Oh, I have a lady, she has a word, horse.
A joke about a horse. Horse. Let me see. If everybody owned a horse, the country'd be more stabilized.
I got home and I called him. I said, they're going to call you about a new show. You're going to come out here. It's a Dick Van Dyke Show.
The Dick Van Dyke Show. Starring Dick Van Dyke.
Maury says to me, what's a Dick Van Dyke? I said, you'll find out when I find out, you know. And that's how Maury got the job.
And then they needed a Laura.
Then they were looking for the wife, and Danny came up with Mary, the girl with 3 names. And that's how the show got started.
Mary Tyler Moore had actually auditioned to be Danny Thomas's daughter in his series, but his nose and her nose, not quite a fit. So he had still remembered her, well, kind of. He didn't remember her name, he just remembered that she had 3 of them.
She wasn't known at all as a person who did comedy. She was a dancer.
I told Sheldon, I have seen 23 girls, and none of them seem right. He said, you'll know when you see her.
And I know Carl likes to talk about how after seeing countless actors come in for this role, something just clicked.
Carl made you feel like just so at ease because that's the way he is. He's just this aura that comes off of him that makes you just feel so comfortable around him.
And I have to believe that he made Mary feel so at ease. And he actually talks about putting his hand on the top of her head and walking her down the hall to Sheldon Leonard's office, who was the producing partner of the show, and saying, here she is, we're hiring her. And it's magic. It was really love at first sight between Mary and Dick, and Larry Matthews, who played Richie Petrie, was beloved by everybody in the show.
When I went through the interview to be cast as Richie, I remember it very, very well. We went into his office and he says, and I want to know if you can pretend some things for me. And I said, sure, what do you want me to pretend? Well, can you pretend like you're really sick? Can you lay down on a couch and tell me how much your tummy hurts? And he says, okay, then I'm going to offer you a cupcake, and your tummy hurts so much you don't even want a cupcake. That's how sick you are.
Richie, how would you like a nice cupcake?
That was in the pilot. You know, where Rob comes and goes, I gave him the cupcake test. He's really sick, because he didn't want the cupcake.
When we come back, on the set, there was love and support, but behind the scenes, cast members were in pain.
She told me this story, I couldn't believe it. She said her father never spoke to her.
And later, their insults were proof that 2 actors were the closest of friends.
Rob, as the producer of this show, once more I must insist that you instruct your staff to show me a little respect.
We're showing you as little respect as possible.
10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, continues here on COZI TV. Welcome back to COZI TV's 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Number 8. The joy on the set disguised a lot of personal pain.
So Rosemary had been a professional performer from the age of 3, but she had had a particularly hard childhood.
I told her, you have a right to be a lot crazier than you are. I mean, her mother and her lived in a one-room apartment with not a stove, a little hot plate, while the money she made as a child performer, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, the father was managing and taking most of the money, which he lived with another woman and gave them a stipend of nothing to live with.
Her dad was a gambler and he would beat her.
Those are obstacles, but she overcame them.
So Dick Van Dyke has talked about his dependence on alcohol. He suffered from a punishing shyness,
Ladies.
which really made it difficult for him to perform, and he turned to alcohol as a way of dealing with that, but became very dependent on it as a result.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to explain why we're here.
Dick is Mr. Jello. Dick is wonderful. Dick, go tell him that. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Mr. Jello, go tell him something.
Are you angry with me?
Well, no, honey, why should I be angry with you?
Well, I wasn't very nice to you last night. I mean, calling you a marshmallow and saying you were afraid to handle the situation with Buddy.
No, why don't you do this, Dick? Oh, I don't. But we loved him.
He's finally conquered his demons. So Mary was an alcoholic as well. Her mother was a drinker, and she pleaded with her mother to stop, but it didn't stop her from falling into the same trap.
Mary didn't have an easy life. She had a mother who was an alcoholic, I think died of it. Her father, she told me this story, I couldn't believe it. She said her father never spoke to her. He gave her one compliment.
So part of Mary's dependence was almost certainly a result of getting virtually no affection at home.
She was 16 years old, she went to her prom. She got a dress for the prom, and when she walked into the room, he said to her, "Mary, you look very handsome." Her only time he complimented her.
Her married life on camera was picture perfect, but her real life marriage to Richard Meeker was anything but.
Mary called me on the phone in my office, and she never did. She said, "I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Oh my God, she's been offered a job on Broadway," because she was her first year, everybody was looking and talking about her.
So she walks in, she's tearful, and she tells Carl that she's leaving Richard, meaning Richard, her husband. And she was just really upset because she was worried that that would result in negative publicity for the show.
She said, "Richard," I thought she was talking about Richard Van Dyke, being formal. She's talking about her husband. I let her vent, and I was very solicitous of her sad moment in her life. And as she walked out of the room, I went, yeah.
Number 7. Eventually, the cast came together as a team, but at the beginning, Rosemary was very disillusioned.
He knows we're keeping a secret from him. I think we ought to tell him.
I had a disagreement with Carl in the first few weeks of the show.
After the first year, we had a talk. She was always grousing there was not enough to do.
Oh, I bet we're going.
Beth, come on. Nice meeting you, folks. Boy, look at all the fun I missed.
She had it wrong, and that I didn't give it to her, but somebody said told her it's about writers of a television show, and it was about a guy who writes for television, and his family is this focal point of it.
You have to remember, she was baby Rosemary. She was a vaudeville star from the age of 3. She had a national radio show, her own show. She headlined Vegas as a teenager. She was used to being the star of the show. She was not used to doing little bit parts. She was used to the spotlight.
I was co-starring, and I said, "I'm not doing much in the thing. I mean, it's all in the home and maybe 1 or 2 little scenes in the office. I'm co-starring, come on."
I did get calls from her the first year. There would be something in the newspaper about the Van Dyke Show that mentioned Dick and Mary. I said, "I didn't put that in. I didn't give interviews. These are guys writing what they see." And I had to make her understand that when Look magazine, this was the big one, they wanted a picture. I said, "You got to live with the fact that Mary is a gorgeous woman."
The home is the most important thing, he says, that we have to play off to the office.
But that was a bone of contention at the beginning. She was misinformed about what the show was about.
I said, "Now you tell me?" Now, I'm co-starring. I'm supposed to be big in this thing.
And the second year, I said, unless you buy the premise of the show, you're not going to be happy coming back for the second year. I said, unless you can accept this, it's not going to work. And she did, and then they became friends.
So it actually benefited the show when Carl made some adjustments to feature Sally and Buddy more. It made the actors happy, but it also gave Carl a chance to kind of let those actors and their talent shine. So you have Rosemary singing comedy and Maury's joke telling, who's basically a joke machine, and Carl assured them that they'd have plenty of material going forward.
You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of you, which he did.
And I made sure that every 8th and 9th show, 7th grade show would feature either Maury and her, either her singing or dancing, having a love affair.
I wanna be around to pick up the pieces when somebody breaks your heart, when somebody twice as smart as I.
She wrote many funny stories for me to do on the show. So I adore Carl. He's brilliant, he's funny, he's sweet, and he writes a book a week, but he's wonderful.
Like you,
When we return, do you remember all 3 Ottoman jokes? And what created one of the longest laughs in the history of TV? 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, continues here on COZI TV. Welcome back to COZI TV's 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Number 6. Everyone remembers there were 2 Ottoman joke openings, but there was actually a 3rd.
So the first season of the show, the opening sequence was nothing to brag about. It was just a bunch of headshots of the actors kind of tossed on a table.
The first one doesn't matter. No one remembers that.
So then, to take advantage of Dick's gift for physical comedy, they developed the Ottoman tripping sequence.
The second one was Dick coming in, seeing his wife, being mesmerized by her beauty, as we all would be.
So she points out Sally and Buddy, and without looking, he crosses over to greet them and then trips over the Ottoman. So Dick does the trip to perfection, but being comedy writers, they can't resist the urge to top themselves, and so they do a second variation.
The one after that was Dick Van Dyke coming in, spotting his lovely wife, and then narrowly avoiding disaster and saying hello to his work colleagues.
So how do you top the topper? The Dick Van Dyke Show figured it out, but that's the one that's often forgotten.
There's actually a 4th opening to the Dick Van Dyke Show, and that is Dick Van Dyke coming in, looking at his beautiful wife, going around the Ottoman. You think he's gonna trip, but he does not. He goes all the way around it, and then trips.
Number 5. Buddy's insults aimed at Mel Cooley were often written by Maury Amsterdam and Richard Deacon together.
Now it makes so much sense. The actors are friends, so they can work on insulting one another.
All right, how long you been spying on us, Curly?
I want you to know you disturbed my dinner.
We're even, you just disturbed mine.
When you first invited me to play with you and Buddy, got to admit I had big qualms.
You still got them, but I think if you zip up your zipper, nobody will know.
That's why it seems so real. That's what I loved about their relationship on camera, is that there was something that was harmless about it, but yet very real.
Oh, Buddy will never be a has-been. He'll always be a never was.
Look who's talking. Been in the business 20 years. He's still a, what is it?
And the great, terrific one-liners, basically just saying how, you're the boss's brother. And that's why you got as far as you did, and calling him Goldilocks, and, he was bald.
Comedians do this all the time. Like, once a comedian becomes your friend, the first thing they do is start insulting you. That's how you know, like, oh, okay, this guy really likes me.
And as a comic, I love that because that's how we riff as comics, while we're waiting for shows. We just make fun of each other, what we're wearing, how we look, our families.
Well, I don't know anything about Happy Spangler as a writer, but he certainly is going to do more good for this company than someone who shall remain hairless.
So Maury Amsterdam knew the business, and he knew the TV business, and he knew he was a vaudeville joke teller. He knew how to hit his mark. He knew how to fire off one-liners, as did Rosemary.
We call it breaking on somebody, or when you're insulting someone. And that's like your whole relationship, is who can one up on the insult.
I would say, if I make fun of somebody, it's because you're my friend. And I think that's how it came across for Buddy and Mel.
Mel says to Dick Van Dyke,
Rob, I don't see how you've done as well as you have with just you, Sally, and a trained ape.
and then Buddy says,
I didn't know you were trained.
I don't know why that cracks me up.
I think you can only make fun and really go aggressive with somebody that you really like. And as comics, that's what we do as well.
This is what comedians do to one another, and it's kind of funny. And that's what I love about their relationship.
When we return, it's still considered one of the most historic TV episodes of all time. And later, how the producers turned real-life moments into situation comedy. 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, continues here on COZI TV. Welcome back to COZI TV's 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Number 4, one of the most historic TV episodes of all time, came from a pitch by 2 new writers.
My dad, Sam Denoff, and Bill Persky were writing partners who met in New York, writing for radio station WNEW, and they were brought out to Hollywood to write for the Steve Allen Show. And after a couple of years, wrote a spec script for the Dick Van Dyke Show.
I was the story editor, the producer, and the head writer. I wrote, like, somebody said 30 or 40 of the first 50, whatever it was, an awful lot. By the way, the typewriter I used just went to the Smithsonian. But I remember getting so, had no life. And my nephew, George Shapiro, and manager, came in and brought me a script by 2 guys.
So the He's My Boy episode, Bill Persky and Sam Denoff wrote that episode. That was pretty radical.
And they met with Carl Reiner, and the script needed some work, and Carl was brilliant in terms of new writers and crafting, and his advice is what makes those scripts so timeless today. And the premise of this great episode is that Rob, in his infinite silliness, is convinced that he and Laura have brought home the wrong baby from the hospital.
Congratulations and much love, Dick and Betty Carter.
They got the wrong flowers.
Do you know a Dick and Betty Carter?
No. So Rob decides, well, we probably got the wrong baby.
Honey, how much do you like that baby?
Rob and Laura were Petri, and the other couple is named Peters.
And Mary is like, Rob, you're out of your mind. No.
Rob, this is our baby, and that's all there is to it.
He talks to them on the phone and is very insistent that they come over and meet, and we'll sort all this thing out. And the famous final scene in the episode is we're in the Petri living room, the doorbell rings. In profile, Rob opens the door.
Hi, we're Mr. and Mrs. Peters.
And his face goes blank.
Come in.
I believe we have your Aunt Bertha's figs and you have Dick and Betty's flowers.
Mrs. Peters, won't you come in?
The network wasn't immediately in love with the idea. They were worried that the joke would seem like it was on the African-American couple.
You think of, it's the 60s. I mean, Loving versus West Virginia, what was that, 67s? I mean, it's ridiculous that there was still segregation, that race relations were, tumultuous at best.
They didn't want to offend the African-American community. And I said, fellas, our heart is in the right place, the writer's heart is in the right place, and the audience will tell you.
Sit down.
When that thing happened, the laughter.
The laugh, I think, was the longest recorded laugh in the history of sitcom television. They had to cut it down when they aired it.
So there's actually a nice twist at the end. We're out of the flashback and into the present, and Rob makes a remark about how their kid is the one who can't get it together at school, and the African-American kid is the one getting straight A's.
I mean, it was really a great statement. And, it says a lot about what television can do to enlighten people.
Everybody knew that the joke was on Rob for being such a doofus. And that ended up starting their career writing for the Dick Van Dyke Show.
That is a beautiful baby. He looks exactly like you.
You really think so?
No. Well, why start him off again?
Number 3, many episodes of The Dick Van Dyke Show were based on real life.
The truth is, the entire series was based on Carl's experience writing for the Sid Caesar show, known as Your Show of Shows. Carl and Estelle Reiner lived in New Rochelle, New York. He would take the train in every morning, like so many commuters, into Grand Central Station and go to work at the office. And of course, his writer's room was not just Buddy and Sally. It was Mel Brooks, Neil Simon, Neil Simon's brother, Danny Simon, Howard Morris, Imogene Coca, some of the greatest writers in television. So the entire series foundation was based on the writer's real life, writing for another television show in the 50s.
A lot of the storylines on the Dick Van Dyke Show were real life incidents that had happened to either the writers or the producers.
And they would get at the table when everybody come back from hiatus, and Carl would sit there and say, okay, what happened to you guys over the summer? And that's how they would write the show.
He talked to the crew, talked to the cast, talked to different members on set, asked them what's going on, and then create a sitcom about it.
Oh, sure. I'd always ask writers what's happening in their lives, and if it was fodder, anything unusual was fodder for a show.
The episode The Ghost of A Chance was based on my experience with my dad. I was, I think, about 7 years old at the time, and my dad was reading to me before bed from the Golden Book Encyclopedia, and he was reading a chapter about ghosts. And I said, Dad, this is interesting. Why don't you write an episode about ghosts for the Dick Van Dyke Show? And that became the episode Ghost of A Chance, C-H-A-N-T-Z.
There's a famous episode I was in where the woodpecker kept pecking at my head.
What bit him in the head? A giant woodpecker? A giant woodpecker?
Well, that was real.
And that was based on a story from Carl Reiner's neighbor.
Millie Schoenbaum. Millie and Jerry were two characters who lived in New Rochelle with our best friends.
And Millie was the model for Millie Helper, who was the neighbor on the show.
One day Millie calls me, she says, I think I got a show for you. Her son went to school, and he came running home. He didn't go, he came running back there. He said, what's the matter? She said, woodpecker.
What happened? He bit me in the head! He bit me in the head! Who did? He did! Right here!
She said, come on. And she walked outside, and there it was, a woodpecker hit him on the head. It pecked his head.
Rich, you know there isn't any giant woodpecker.
Is he all right? Oh, he's fine, Millie. He saw the woodpecker again. Yeah, that's the biggest woodpecker I ever saw.
Millie, we're not going to humor him anymore.
Who's humoring him? That is the biggest woodpecker I ever saw. It looked like a glandular case. Really, you're not kidding, are you?
And the interesting thing about it is that we didn't have a reason why a woodpecker pecked his head. So I gave a legitimate reason from my standpoint. Why would a woodpecker peck on their kid's head?
Well, the game warden said it was nesting time, and she began building her nest with hair from Richie's hairbrush. Now, she liked Richie's hair, and she didn't care whether it was new or used hair. So you see, Rich, she wasn't trying to hurt you. She just wanted some of your hair to lay her eggs in.
Now, young man, will you listen to your mommy when she tells you to keep your hairbrush clean? No.
What do you mean, no?
I like to be a nest. Here, woodpecker. Want some hair?
I remember that Carl Reiner imbued on all the writers on that show, which was, don't write anything forced. Life is funny enough.
As a writer, one of the things that I know to be true is that you don't have to really make things up. If you stay alert and just look around, there are so many things that happen in life that are just funny or have the potential to be funny.
And the humor that comes out of real life is timeless.
I don't understand this, honey. I make a good living. Why is it we always have to cut corners? You know, when we were first married, we lived in a one-room apartment on a lot less. Why didn't the money fly out the window then?
Well, a lot more windows now.
Carl made sure that there were no specific cultural references in the Dick Van Dyke Show, because he knew that the show would run and run and run for years to come, and that kept the show from getting stale.
I remember the only thing I told myself, and I told it to other writers who came along, no politics of the day. It dates it. No slang of the day. I said, that dates it worse than anything. We talk English, that's it.
Everything was believable at that time. And that's the most important thing I remember from all of those story things, and I think that carries over today in my career as a theater producer, is the stories have to come first, and the story has to be believable.
You know, as a comic, as me, I use everything good or bad that happens in my life, and I try to always find the funniness, because that's a way to connect with people too.
Because that builds a stronger connection from the audience. If things are complete fantasy, you're not going to get that magic that you need to have an engaged audience.
When we return, how the cast and crew of the Dick Van Dyke Show bonded like family. 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, continues here on COZI TV. Welcome back to COZI TV's 10 Secret Stories, a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Number 2, the actors were given a lot of latitude to pitch jokes and make things funnier.
When we were rehearsing, and especially when you have people as talented as Maury Amsterdam and Rosemary and Dick and Mary and the group that was together, they were given a lot of latitude in terms of, hey, if you think something's funny or you have a suggestion to throw in, please. Carl welcomed that.
Richard Deacon, he would come to me and say, I think if I were you, I'd say that line a little better. And I said, what am I saying wrong? Well, you're emphasizing this, and I think you should let me try it. Nobody got mad. Nobody said, who the hell are you to tell me how to act? Nobody did any of that. Everybody said, oh, gee, thanks, you know. And Maury would say, how about the guy walked on the bridge and so forth and so on?
Did you hear about the stick up on the bridge?
No.
Who threw it up there?
And everybody laughed and Carl said, that's in.
Anytime any was stuck for a quip, Maury would, not only for himself, but for whoever needed a quip, he was there. He was a dear, dear man.
Dick Van Dyke was an amazing physical comedian, and of course Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy was his huge idol.
All right, Stanley, sit down. There's no chair there.
They met and became friends in Stan's later life.
By the way, Steve Martin just lately said that the single most talented man in our business is definitely Dick Van Dyke, ever. He can do everything.
Between takes on the Dick Van Dyke Show, Dick Van Dyke would be told to do little things. So one was to be a tap dancer on crutches, and he goes, no, 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 I got something better. I can be a tap dancer on crutches on Novocaine.
And Dick could do anything with his body. He was rubbery. You see a lot of this in Mary Poppins, and you see a lot of it in the Dick Van Dyke Show.
He's now 90 years old. He can still dance, and he can still dance dangerously. He dances on places where you can hurt yourself.
And number 1, it might have been the happiest and most congenial production in TV history.
The process really was once a week after an episode was shot. The next day, they would gather around a card table and read the next script. And everybody looked forward to that because it was so exciting. They were going to get to see what wonderful idea the writers had come up with and how they were going to bring it to the public. The anticipation of a new episode every week gave them something to look forward to, and there was such joy in the working environment.
The whole thing about the Van Dyke Show we were writing about today, that's the experience I had today doing a show, getting actors who looked like they belonged in this era. And if you write about yourself and my own family, you're not that different than anybody else.
It was very, very, very unique. You work on shows that people are just kind of like, yeah, I want this, and there's a lot of infighting, but it wasn't any of us, really. It didn't ever happen. And even the directors and the crew, you know, they were just the prop men. They were just, everybody was special. We were all together all 5 years.
So as a kid growing up, I got to go a few times a month to the filmings of the show or the rehearsals. Danny Thomas had built a gymnasium, a steam room on the studio lot. My dad and I would go and we'd have lunch with the company on the stage, and then he and I would go take a schwitz in the steam room and maybe get a massage, and then I'd put on my blue blazer and my gray flannel slacks, and we'd go to the studio for the filming of the Dick Van Dyke Show. And it was a nice way to grow up, going to Dad's office like that.
We were pretty lucky, actually. We had a pretty special group of people, and I think it comes from the top down. So look at Sheldon Leonard, who was just one of the most wonderful human beings I've ever had the pleasure to be around and work for. Danny Thomas, also just a really down-to-earth, just really, really wonderful, warm person. Carl. And then it all starts to go down from there, I think, to the people they cast, the people they had in the show. But it's true, we were very close with each other. And, you know, Rosemary and Maury worked together way before the Dick Van Dyke Show. And Deacon and Rose had known each other way before the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Richard Deacon was like my older brother. He and I were very, very close, and he was a brilliant actor. He was wonderful.
I think the working environment on the Dick Van Dyke Show was a family, and yet most families have turmoil and aggravation. I never heard of that. I never saw it myself, and I never heard Dad come home and talk about any kind of frustrations or anxiety. It all came from Carl Reiner and Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas, who were the executive producers of the show, who were all tremendous professionals, well-seasoned.
I can't begin to tell you what a group this was, down to the script girl, to the cameraman, to the assistant director, to the director, whoever it was at that time. We had Sheldon for a while. Jerry Paris was just brilliant. He was an actor in the show, but wanted to become a director. And when he became a director, answer that I'm busy.
One sponsor said, "Why does he have to be a writer? Couldn't he be like an insurance salesman?" I said, "Yes." And then when we see the work where he's going to, they talking numbers. Here they be talking jokes. I said, so we get laughs.
Yeah. Again, we truly were a family out on the set. And there was no ego battles on the set. There really wasn't. And nobody ever raised their voice. There was never any yelling. There was never any power plays by any of the actors or stars. Everybody was very humble. Everybody was a team. Everybody knew that if we did what we did best, we'd have a really great show. And that's really all that counted to everybody. And it was a very, very great atmosphere and environment to be around, especially as a child. To grow up around this, where I come from an Italian Catholic family where there was yelling every minute. So, you know.
We just went to work. We loved what we were doing. Couldn't wait to go to work. After we finished shooting of the show, everybody would go out to dinner together. It was, I know it's a cliche, but I swear to God, it's true. Everybody got along with everybody. Everybody was complimentary to one another. Everybody loved one another. Everybody looked out for one another.
You know, I just thought of something that gives me more pleasure than anything. Young kids who are watching the Van Dyke Show, this happened like in 3 different generations, 15 years apart. I must be 30 kids, I don't know how many, come up to me and said, I saw comedians and I didn't know they had writers. He says, I would never get up in front of people, but I used to say funny things. All of these guys became writers. I was telling it on the Conan O'Brien show. He said, I'm one of those kids.